had studied primitive species for 40 years. He had watched the broken climb from mud huts to starships. He had documented the silence as they discovered fire. He had written 300 reports on species that thought they were special, but were really just like everyone else. But humans were different. He sat in his office on the hegemony station, surrounded by screens showing data he did not understand. The council had given him a simple task: watch the humans, learn how they fight, tell us if they are dangerous. The answer should have been easy. Every species was dangerous in some way. The had poison claws, the broken had numbers, the could survive in vacuum, but danger could be measured. Danger could be planned for. The hegemony had survived 12,000 years by understanding danger. Looked at the human data and felt something he had not felt in decades: confusion. He pulled up the first file, Human History. He had requested everything the hegemony knew about their past. The file was enormous. Most species had simple histories. They fought, they unified, they reached for the stars. The fighting stopped when communication became instant. Why fight your neighbor when you could talk to them? Every species learned this lesson within a few centuries. Humans had possessed instant global communication for over 300 years. They had never stopped fighting. Read about something called the World Wars, millions dead, then something called the Cold War, billions threatened, then dozens of smaller wars, rebellions, civil conflicts, and border disputes. Even after humans reached the stars, they kept fighting. Colony against colony, faction against faction, brother against brother. This made no sense. War was expensive. War was wasteful. War was what species did before they grew up. Humans had been a spacefaring civilization for 2 centuries now. They should have matured. They should have unified. Every other species had. But humans kept fighting. Requested a transfer to an observation post. He needed to see this for himself. The journey took 3 weeks. He arrived at Station Quiet Eye, a hidden platform in the orbit of a dead moon. Below him spun a human colony world called New Valdosta. 2 human factions were fighting over it. Something about mining rights, something about old debts. The reasons did not matter too. The fighting did. He activated the observation drones and watched. The battle was taking place in a mountain valley. One faction held the high ground. The other was trying to take it. Standard conflict. Every species had fought battles like this at some point in their history. But something was wrong. The attacking force was outnumbered 3 to 1. They had fewer weapons. Their supply lines had been cut 2 days ago. By every measure knew they should have retreated, or surrendered, or negotiated. Any rational force would have done so. The humans attacked anyway. Watch them charge up the mountain. They fell by the dozens. Their formations broke. Their officers died. Still they came. They reached the enemy lines and fought with knives when their guns ran empty. They fought with rocks when their knives broke. They fought with their hands when they had nothing left. By sunset, they had taken the mountain. Ran the numbers 3 times. The attacking force had suffered 70% casualties. They had won a position that gave them no real advantage. The cost was insane. The victory was meaningless. But they had won. He pulled up communication intercepts from the battle. He expected to hear desperation, fear, the sounds of beings pushed beyond their limits. Instead, he heard laughter, singing. One human was making jokes while bleeding from a wound that should have killed him. Another was complaining about missing dinner. They had just done something impossible, something no rational species would attempt, and they were acting like it was normal. Because for them it was. Requested more data. He found a battle from 3 months ago. A human unit had been surrounded in a small town. They had no ammunition, no reinforcements, no hope. The enemy offered them surrender, good terms. They would be treated well. All they had to do was put down their weapons. The humans fixed bayonets and charged. They broke through the enemy line. They took weapons from the dead and kept fighting. They reached friendly territory with 11 survivors out of 60. The military analysts called it a miracle. The humans called it Tuesday. Found another battle, and another, and another. Each one was the same. Humans facing impossible odds. Humans refusing to surrender. Humans dying in ways that should have broken any species, and then the survivors getting up and fighting again. He contacted his supervisor and requested extended observation time. His request was approved without question. The council was curious about humans, was beginning to think the council should be afraid. He spent the next month watching battles across 3 human systems. He learned their tactics, their weapons, their organization, but mostly he learned their nature. Humans did not fight like other species. When they fought, they calculated. Every attack was measured against its cost. Every retreat was planned in advance. If victory became too expensive, they stopped. This was rational. This was normal. Humans did not calculate. They committed. Once they decided to fight, they fought until they won or died. There was no middle ground. There was no acceptable failure. Even when victory cost more than it was worth, they paid the price. Found a human term for this. They called it seeing it through. They considered it a virtue. He found another term. No retreat, no surrender. Humans painted these words on their walls. They sang songs about it. They told their children stories of warriors who died rather than run. They built statues to soldiers who stood when standing meant death. They stubbornness. Wrote his first report at the end of the month. It was short. It contained only one recommendation. Do not engage humans in military conflict under any circumstances. He sent it to the council and waited. The response came 3 days later. The council thanked him for his work. They appreciated his concern, but surely he was overreacting. Humans were primitives. They had no unified government. Their technology was generations behind the hegemony. They posed no real threat. Read the response and felt that confusion again. But this time, something else came with it, something cold and heavy in his chest. Fear. The council did not understand. They saw human disunity as weakness. They saw human conflict as chaos. They did not see what saw. Humans had been fighting each other since before they could write. They had invented new ways to kill faster than they invented ways to heal. They had burned cities and poisoned lands and slaughtered millions of their own kind. And after all of that, they were still here, still fighting, still growing. Any species that could survive itself could survive anything. Requested permission to continue his observation. He wanted to understand how humans fought, not just that they fought, but how, what made them different, what made them dangerous. The council approved his request. They still thought he was wasting his time. They were wrong. Returned to his screens and watched another battle begin below. Humans killing humans over a strip of worthless land, dying for reasons that made no sense, winning victories that cost more than they were worth. And somewhere deep in his mind, a voice whispered a truth he did not want to hear. If they ever stop fighting each other and start fighting us, we are all going to die. Had been watching humans for 3 months now. Every day he understood them less. He sat in his quarters on station Quiet Eye, surrounded by screens and data pads and empty drink containers. He had not slept properly in weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw humans charging into fire. He saw them dying with smiles on their faces. He saw them doing things that no species should do and doing them gladly. His colleagues thought he was losing his mind. Perhaps they were right. Today he was trying something new. He had brought in the best conflict analysts in the sector, 4 experts from 4 different species, each one trained in war prediction. They would apply their models to human behavior. They would find the pattern. They would make sense of the madness. It took them 2 hours to fail. The first analyst she ran human casualty data through standard models and got errors. The numbers did not fit. Human losses were too high for the victories gained. No rational species would accept such costs. "Your data must be wrong," she said. Showed her the raw footage. She watched humans throw themselves at fortified positions. She watched them die by the hundreds to gain meters of ground. She watched survivors mourn their dead for 10 minutes and then attack again. She left without speaking. The second analyst was broken. His species understood numbers better than anyone. He calculated the economic cost of human warfare and found it impossible. Humans spent more on weapons than on medicine. They destroyed resources they could have shared. They burned cities they could have captured. "This is not war," he said. "This is ritual suicide." Showed him the outcome data. Despite the insane costs, humans kept expanding. They colonized new worlds while fighting over old ones. They grew stronger while tearing themselves apart. They broke every rule of population dynamics and thrived anyway. The broken analyst recalculated 3 times. Then he asked to be excused. Never saw him again. The third analyst gave up after watching footage of something called the Battle of Bridge. It happened 6 months ago on a human colony called Meridian. 2 factions were fighting over water rights. One faction needed to retreat across a river. The only crossing was an old stone bridge. The enemy was coming fast. Someone had to hold the bridge while the civilians escaped. 53 humans volunteered. They held the bridge for 16 hours. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. They had no artillery, no air support, no hope of reinforcement. They knew they were going to die. They held anyway. When ammunition ran out, they fought with knives. When knives broke, they fought with stones. When stones were gone, they used their bodies to block the bridge. The enemy had to climb over the dead to advance. 11 wounded survived, 42 died, and every single civilian escaped. The analyst watched the footage in silence. When it ended, she asked a simple question. Why did they volunteer? Had asked himself the same thing. He had found the answer in the communications records. The 53 volunteers were not special forces. They were not elite warriors. They were farmers and miners and teachers who had picked up guns when the war started. They volunteered because the wounded could not run. They volunteered because children were among the evacuees. They volunteered because someone had to, and they decided it would be them. They chose to die so others could live, and they considered this normal. The analyst left. She submitted a report that said only, "Human behavior cannot be modeled. Do not attempt prediction." Was alone again. He spent the next week studying human military honors. Every species had awards for bravery. Every species celebrated victory, but human awards were different. Their highest honors were almost always given for acts that resulted in death. He found medals given to soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their friends. He found awards for pilots who crashed their damaged ships into enemy targets. He found ceremonies honoring warriors who stood alone against armies, knowing they would die, fighting anyway. Humans did not celebrate victory. They celebrated sacrifice. Pulled up a human database and searched for their most honored warriors. He expected to find generals who won great battles, conquerors who built empires, leaders who achieved victory without loss. Instead, he found names like Enroland, and he found soldiers who lost, warriors who died, heroes who failed. Humans built monuments to beautiful defeat. He brought his findings to his supervisor, a senior named. She was old and wise and had seen many primitive species rise and fall. She would understand. She did not understand. "They are savages," said, waving a hand at his data. "All primitive species glorify violence. They will mature." "They have been spacefaring for 2 centuries," said. "They colonize new worlds faster than they lose them to war. They grow despite the destruction. They do not mature because they do not need to." Was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question had been dreading. "What are you suggesting?" Pulled up his final piece of data. Human population figures from their home system. 300 years ago, humans had numbered 8 billion on a single world. They had fought 2 global wars that killed hundreds of millions. They had created weapons capable of ending their species. They had come within minutes of destroying themselves at least twice. Now they numbered 40 billion across 200 worlds. Their weapons were stronger, their wars were larger, and still they grew. They did this to themselves, said quietly. All of this death, all of this destruction, they inflicted it on their own kind, and they survived, they thrived. He looked at with fear in his eyes. What happens when they stop fighting each other? What happens when something makes them unite? Did not answer, she did not need to, they both knew. A species that could survive its own worst impulses could survive anything. A species that sacrificed would sacrifice everything. A species that celebrated defeat would never stop fighting, no matter how many times it lost. Submitted his second report that night. It was longer than the first. It contained projections, analyses, historical comparisons, but the conclusion was the same. Do not engage humans in military conflict. Not now. Not ever. Any war with humanity will cost more than we are willing to pay, and they will always be willing to pay more. The council received his report. They discussed it for 3 days. They consulted their own experts. They ran their own simulations. Then they sent a polite message thanking him for his service. They assured him his concerns would be noted. They informed him that the hegemony had maintained peace for 12,000 years by being strong, not by being afraid. They did not understand. Requested permission to continue his observations. He wanted to study human training, human doctrine, human psychology. If the council would not listen to warnings, perhaps they would listen to evidence. Permission was granted. Returned to his screens. Below him, humans continued to kill each other over land and water and pride. They died in ways that should have broken them. They got up and kept fighting. And watched and learned and grew more afraid with every passing day. Had watched humans fight from a distance for 6 months. Now he needed to get closer. He deployed stealth drones to human military bases across 3 systems. He planted listening devices in their training grounds. He hacked into their communication networks. All of this was illegal under hegemony law. No longer cared about hegemony law. He cared about survival. What he found kept him awake for 4 days straight. Human military training was not preparation for war. It was controlled destruction of the self. They took healthy young beings and broke them down until nothing remained. Then they built something new from the pieces. He watched recruits march until their feet bled. He watched them crawl through mud and fire and poison. He watched them go days without sleep, weeks without comfort, months without kindness. The instructors screamed at them, beat them, told them they were worthless. And the recruits kept coming back. Searched the hegemony database for similar training methods. He found nothing. Other species trained their soldiers to fight. Humans trained their soldiers to suffer. The dropout rate was enormous. 8 out of 10 recruits failed basic training. 9 out of 10 failed advanced programs. The humans called this acceptable. They wanted only the ones who could not be broken. Found a human term for these survivors. They called them hardened. He watched a special forces selection program and almost stopped the recording. Humans were subjected to conditions that would be considered torture anywhere in the hegemony. Starvation, sleep deprivation, simulated drowning, psychological abuse designed to shatter minds. The humans volunteered for this. They fought for the privilege of being destroyed and rebuilt. Contacted a hegemony psychologist and showed her the footage. She watched for 10 minutes before asking him to stop. This is how they make slaves, she said. Break the mind, rebuild loyalty. It is an old technique. Many primitive species use it. Shook his head. Watch what happens next. He showed her footage of the same soldiers 6 months later. They were not slaves. They were not broken. They were calm, confident, and terrifyingly competent. They operated in small teams behind enemy lines. They made decisions without orders. They showed initiative, creativity, and independent thought. The training had not made them mindless. It had made them unstoppable. They are not trained to obey, said. They are trained to endure. They learn that nothing can break them. Nothing can stop them, and then they believe it. The psychologist left without another word, continued his research. He studied human military history next, not the battles he had already seen, but older ones, ancient ones, the stories humans told their children about war. He found a battle called Thermopylae, 300 warriors holding a pass against an army of millions. They knew they would die. They fought for 3 days. They killed thousands. They became legends. He found a siege called Stalingrad, humans fighting in the ruins of their own city, street by street, building by building, room by room. They refused to retreat. They refused to surrender. They destroyed their own city rather than let it fall. He found a frozen lake called, human soldiers surrounded by enemies and killing cold. They were ordered to retreat. Instead, they attacked in a different direction. They called it advancing toward the enemy rather than retreating. They fought their way out through an army that outnumbered them 10-1. Saw the pattern now. When humans were cornered, when all logic demanded surrender, they became more dangerous, not less. Something in their nature refused to accept defeat. They would rather die fighting than live with failure. He found a human general's words from centuries ago. We are surrounded. That simplifies our problem. Humans saw hopeless situations as opportunities. Dug deeper, he found something called total war. The concept made his blood run cold. Other species fought limited conflicts. They destroyed military targets. They avoided civilians. They preserved infrastructure for the eventual peace. War was expensive, so they kept costs low. Humans had a different approach. When truly threatened, they converted everything into weapons. Factories became arsenals. Schools became training grounds. Civilians became soldiers. Even children helped build bombs and bullets. They had burned their own cities rather than let enemies capture them. They had poisoned their own wells. They had destroyed their own food supplies. If they could not have something, no one would have it. And then when the war ended, they rebuilt, faster than should be possible. Cities rose from ashes. Factories returned to making peacetime goods. Soldiers became farmers. They could destroy everything and still come back stronger. Found records of something called the economic miracle. After a devastating war, a human nation had risen from total ruin to become the third largest economy on their planet in just 20 years. They had done this twice, with 2 different nations. Destruction did not weaken humans, it motivated them. Requested an interview with a human military officer through neutral channels. It took weeks to arrange. When it finally happened, he spoke through an automated translation system that hid his identity. The officer was old, retired. He had fought in 3 wars and lost friends in all of them, expected bitterness. He found peace instead. You want to understand how we fight, the old human said. That is the wrong question. Ask instead why we fight. Asked. The human was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke words that would remember for the rest of his life. We do not fight to win. We fight to make losing cost more than our enemies can pay. And here is the secret that no one tells you. He leaned forward. We are always willing to pay more than them. Always. No matter what it costs. No matter how long it takes. We will keep paying until they cannot afford to fight anymore. And then we will keep paying until they forget they ever wanted to fight us. Ended the interview and sat in silence for hours. He finally understood. Humans did not fear death. They did not fear pain. They did not fear loss. They had lived with all 3 for so long that these things had become familiar, comfortable even. What they feared was surrender. What they feared was giving up. What they feared was stopping. And so they never stopped. They kept fighting. They kept paying. They kept dying. Generation after generation, war after war, defeat after defeat, until finally, inevitably, their enemies ran out of will. Began writing his third report. His hands trembled as he typed. Outside his window, human ships moved between colony worlds. Human soldiers trained for wars that had not started yet. Human children played games about battle and honor and sacrifice. They were always preparing, always ready, always waiting for the next fight. And somewhere in the hegemony, bureaucrats were discussing whether to teach these humans a lesson about respecting their betters. Finished his report and sent it to everyone he knew. He marked it urgent. He marked it critical. He marked it the most important document he had ever written. The response came the next day. The council appreciated his dedication. His concerns would be considered, but the hegemony had not survived 12,000 years by showing weakness. Sometimes, primitive species needed firm guidance. They were going to provoke the humans. Began planning his escape. The council chamber was the largest room had ever seen. 1,000 seats rose in circles around a central platform where speakers addressed the rulers of 340 species. Light came from everywhere and nowhere. The air smelled of power and age and ancient mistakes. Stood on that platform now, alone, facing beings who controlled more worlds than he could count. His final report was displayed on screens throughout the chamber. His final chance to prevent disaster. Honored members of the council, he began, I have spent 1 year studying human military capability. I have watched their wars. I have analyzed their history. I have learned their psychology. And I am here to beg you, do not engage humanity in conflict. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, ignored them. You have seen my reports. You know humans fight differently than any species in the hegemony, but I do not think you understand what this means. So today, I will show you. He pulled up images of human art, paintings, sculptures, ancient photographs, all depicting war. Every species creates art about conflict, victory monuments, triumph songs, celebrations of power. Look at what humans create. The images showed soldiers dying in mud, warriors falling before overwhelming odds, last stands and final charges and beautiful, tragic defeats. Humans do not celebrate victory. They celebrate sacrifice. They build monuments to soldiers who lost. They sing songs about heroes who died. They tell their children stories of warriors who stood alone against armies, knowing they would fail, fighting anyway. Pause to let this sink in. Do you understand what this means? They have made losing into something sacred. They do not fear defeat. They worship it. A species that worships defeat can never be conquered. You cannot break what is already broken. You cannot threaten what does not fear death. An admiral stood in the upper rows, armored in ceremonial shells. You speak of primitive superstition. Our weapons will make their courage irrelevant. One orbital strike and their colonies burn. Had expected this, he pulled up projection data. I have run simulations, thousands of them. In every scenario where the hegemony achieves quick victory, humans do not surrender. They scatter, they hide. They build weapons in caves and basements. They attack supply lines. They target families of officers. They make occupation impossible. He showed casualty projections. The admiral's armor plates rattled in surprise. A quick war costs us 40,000 soldiers. A long war costs us 4 million. And here is the truth you do not want to hear. There is no scenario where this stays a quick war. Another voice called out, a broken analyst. Their technology is generations behind ours. They cannot sustain prolonged conflict against superior forces. Smiled without humor. I thought the same. Then I studied their adaptation rate. Humans have been purchasing our technology through black market channels for decades. They cannot build a jump drive, but they have learned to repair them. They cannot manufacture plasma rifles, but they can modify captured ones. Every weapon we bring to their worlds becomes a weapon they can use against us. He showed images of human engineers tearing apart hegemony equipment, learning, adapting, improving. Within 5 years of sustained conflict, they will have reverse-engineered our best weapons. Within 10 years, they will improve upon them. This is what they do. They take what they face and they make it their own. They have been doing it for their entire history. The chamber was quiet now, pressed his advantage. But none of this is the true danger. The true danger is something else, something I did not understand until I studied their culture. He pulled up a new display, text this time, quotes from human leaders across centuries. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. He let the words hang in the air. This was spoken by a human leader when his nation faced certain defeat. They were alone. Their allies had fallen. The enemy controlled all surrounding territory. Logic demanded surrender. Looked around the chamber. They fought for 5 more years. They won. He pulled up another quote. I have not yet begun to fight. This was spoken by a human naval commander. His ship was sinking. Most of his crew was dead. The enemy demanded surrender. He responded with these words. Then he boarded the enemy vessel and captured it. More quotes filled the screen. Nuts, a single word, spoken by a human general when surrounded by forces 5 times his size. They demanded his surrender. He gave them one word and then attacked. We will make them pay for every inch. Words spoken by a human soldier in a losing battle. They paid and paid and paid until the enemy decided the land was not worth the price. Turned off the display. Humans have a concept that exists in no other species. They call it the posthumous victory. They will plant bombs set to explode after their deaths. They will poison supplies they can no longer use. They will sabotage equipment they must abandon. And their children will take up the fight, sometimes centuries later, for reasons the original warriors have forgotten. He paused. You cannot defeat humans in a single battle. You cannot defeat them in a single war. You cannot defeat them in a single generation. They remember, they always remember, and they never forgive. The Admiral spoke again. Then what do you suggest? That we show weakness, that we allow them to insult hegemony members without consequence? Had been waiting for this question. I suggest you ask yourself what it would take to truly defeat humanity, not win a battle, not occupy a world, defeat them, make them stop fighting forever. He answered his own question. Extinction, nothing less, anything else, and they will remember, they will rebuild, they will come for us. Not in our lifetimes, perhaps, but they will come. Human vengeance is patient. Human memory is long. They have feuds that have lasted 1,000 years. The chamber was silent. Kill 90% of them and the survivors will have children. Those children will grow up hearing stories of what we did. They will swear oaths of revenge. They will dedicate their lives to our destruction. And one day, when we have forgotten, when we think the danger has passed, they will come. Straightened his spine. This is my final recommendation. Do not attack humans. Do not threaten them. Do not give them a reason to unite against us. The only war we can win against humanity is the war we never fight. The council voted 3 hours later. The margin was narrow, 212 to 193. The motion passed. The hegemony would launch a limited punitive action against the human colony world of New Carson, a show of force, a lesson in respect, nothing more. Watched the results appear on his screen. His hands did not shake. He had expected this. He had prepared for this. He filed his resignation that night. He requested transport to the far edge of hegemony space. as far from human territory as possible. His request was approved without question. They thought he was a coward. Perhaps he was, but he would be a living coward. The first hegemony ships left for New Carson 3 weeks later. Watched the news feeds from his transport as it fled in the opposite direction. He saw the initial reports: successful orbital bombardment, human defenses destroyed, landing operations commencing. He saw the follow-up reports: resistance heavier than expected, casualties mounting, reinforcements requested. He saw the confused reports: human ships appearing from nowhere, civilian vessels converted to warships, mining craft packed with explosives. He saw the final report before he lost signal range, a single line of text that confirmed everything he had feared. Human forces counterattacking across all sectors, hegemony positions untenable, full retreat authorized. Closed his screen and stared into the darkness of space. It was beginning, and it would not end until one side was destroyed. He knew which side that would be. 6 months had passed since the attack on New Carson. Sat in a small room on a forgotten station at the edge of known space, watching the galaxy burn. His screens showed news feeds from across the hegemony, battle reports, casualty lists, retreat orders. Each day brought worse news than the last. Each day proved that everything he had warned about was true. The humans were coming, and they were not stopping. The war had begun as the Council planned, a limited strike, a show of force. The hegemony fleet had entered the New Carson system with overwhelming power. They had destroyed orbital defenses in minutes. They had landed troops on 3 continents. Victory seemed certain. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, human reinforcements arrived. Not a military fleet, something worse. Thousands of civilian ships from dozens of colony worlds, cargo haulers with weapons welded to their hulls, mining vessels converted into bombers, passenger liners packed with volunteers. They should not have been a threat. They were not warships. They were not trained. They were farmers and miners and teachers who had put down their tools and picked up whatever weapons they could find. They were enough. The hegemony fleet faced a choice: destroy the civilian ships and prove every terrible thing humans believed about aliens, or retreat and lose the campaign. They retreated. The Council called it a strategic withdrawal. They promised a stronger response. They assured the hegemony that humans would soon learn their place. The humans did not wait for the lesson. Within 1 week, human ships appeared in 3 hegemony systems. They did not attack military targets. They attacked supply depots, fuel stations, communication relays. They destroyed infrastructure and vanished before defense fleets could respond. The Council demanded negotiations. The humans refused. "We did not start this," the human message said, "but we will finish it." The war entered its 2nd month. The hegemony mobilized its full military strength. 400 million soldiers from 100 species, warships that could crack planets, technology that humans could not match. It did not matter. Humans fought differently than anyone expected. They did not defend static positions. They did not engage in fleet battles. They struck and ran and struck again. They appeared where they were not expected and vanished before response. Recognized the tactics. He had seen them in human history: guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, the weapon of the weak against the strong. Humans had perfected it over centuries of fighting themselves. The hegemony captured human worlds. Humans kept fighting. The hegemony destroyed human fleets. Humans built more. The hegemony killed human soldiers. Humans had plenty to spare. Every species in the hegemony was watching now. Some were afraid. Some were calculating. Some were beginning to wonder if they had chosen the right side. Pulled up the latest casualty reports. The hegemony had lost 600,000 soldiers in 6 months. The humans had lost 3 million. By any rational measure, they were losing badly. They showed no sign of stopping. A hegemony admiral gave an interview promising victory within the year. Human communication channels responded with laughter. They quoted the admiral's words back at him with a single addition. Within the year, and the year after that, and the year after that, we have nothing but time. Understood now. The humans were not trying to win quickly. They were trying to make the war last. Every day that passed, they learned more. Every battle they adapted. Every defeat they improved. And the hegemony was paying for every inch of progress in blood. The council offered peace terms in the 4th month. Generous terms. The humans could keep their colonies. They would receive reparations for New Carson. They would be granted full hegemony membership. All they had to do was stop fighting. The human response was 3 words long. Not good enough. Received word from former colleagues in the Intelligence Bureau. Panic was spreading through the council. Species were demanding answers. Alliances were fracturing. 12,000 years of unity were cracking under the pressure of 6 months of war. And the humans kept coming. They had stopped fighting each other. That was the strangest thing. Human factions that had been enemies for generations now fought side by side. Colonies that had nearly destroyed each other now shared resources and soldiers. The attack on New Carson had done what nothing else in human history had managed. It had united them. Remembered his own words from the council chamber. What happens when they stop fighting each other? What happens when something makes them unite? Now he knew. The 5th month brought the first defections. A hegemony member species quietly from the war, then another, then 3 more. They claimed economic concerns. They claimed strategic necessity. Everyone knew the truth. They were afraid. The humans noticed. They began sending messages to other species. Not threats, promises, join us and you will be protected, oppose us and you will fall. Simple, clear, terrifying. More species defected. The hegemony shrank. The war continued. Watched from his forgotten station as everything he had predicted came true, he felt no satisfaction. He felt only sorrow. Millions were dying. Civilizations were falling. And all of it could have been prevented. All they had to do was listen. 6 months to the day after the attack on New Carson received a priority alert. His screens flickered. New data streamed across his display. Human ships had been detected, heading in his direction, hundreds of them. He had run far enough. He had hidden long enough. The war had found him. Did not panic. He had been expecting this. He sat down at his terminal and began typing. His final report, his last testament, the document he hoped would survive to teach future species the lesson the hegemony had refused to learn. He worked through the night. He wrote about everything he had seen, everything he had learned, everything he had tried to warn them about. As dawn broke over the station, he finished the last paragraph. I watched humans war. First against each other, then against us. And I realized too late what every species should understand. You do not fight humans to defeat them. You can only fight them to delay the moment when they defeat you. He paused, considering his next words carefully. We made a mistake. We saw their endless conflicts and thought them weak. We saw their internal divisions and thought them vulnerable. We saw their stubbornness and thought it primitive. We were wrong. Their conflicts made them strong. They spent 10,000 years fighting the most dangerous enemy they would ever face, themselves. They learned every form of warfare. They mastered every tactic. They built weapons that could destroy worlds and built the will to use them. When we attacked them, we did not face primitives. We faced the survivors of 10,000 years of brutal evolution. We faced a species that had already been to hell and back countless times and kept going. We never stood a chance. We simply had not given them a reason to prove it yet. Transmitted his report to every archive in range. He set it to repeat broadcast on every frequency. He hit to every data storage device on the station. Then he waited. The human ships arrived at midday. They did not attack. Instead, they broadcast a simple message. This is Human Fleet 7. We are not here to destroy. We are here to offer terms. Respond if you wish to talk. Opened a channel. His voice was steady. This is former senior strategic analyst of the Hegemony Intelligence Bureau. I am the one who tried to warn them about you. There was silence for a moment. Then a human voice, warm with something that might have been respect. We know who you are. We found your reports. They were very accurate. Not accurate enough. No one listened. That is not your fault. Looked at his screens. Hundreds of human ships hung in space around his station, each one crewed by beings who had traveled across the stars to fight a war they had not started. What happens now? He asked. Now we end this. Not with extinction, not with genocide. That is not who we want to be. But the hegemony as it exists will fall. Something new will rise from its ashes. Something better, we hope. Thought about this. And me. You tried to prevent this war. You risked your career to speak the truth. That matters to us. You are free to go wherever you wish. The channel closed. The human ships moved on, continuing their advance toward hegemony space. Sat alone in his station watching them go. He thought about everything he had seen, everything he had learned, everything he had lost. And finally he understood. Humans were not monsters. They were not demons. They were not the destroyers they appeared to be. They were simply beings who refused to give up, who refused to surrender, who refused to stop fighting no matter the cost. They had built a civilization on stubbornness and sacrifice. They had survived their own worst impulses. They had made it to the stars despite every obstacle their nature placed in their path. And now they would reshape the galaxy, not because they were the strongest but because they were the most determined, because they never stopped, because they never quit. Because that was what humans did. Began a new report, not a warning this time, a history, the story of how one species rose from a single world to change everything, the story of how the galaxy learned the hardest lesson. Never give humans a reason to fight. Because once they start, they never stop.